Great. Do you have a regular agenda? I don't see like just a regular agenda. I don't think so.
All right, let me articulate. I would now like to call to order the July 16th, 2025 meeting of the Indiana State Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bess.
I see him.
You're on mute, Scott. Try again.
Present.
Got
Ms.
it.
DeLosa.
Present.
Mr. Durham.
Present.
Dr. Ernest.
Here.
Ms. Hamill.
Here.
Mr. Gastineau.
Here.
Mr. Mapes.
Here.
Ms. Moat.
Here.
Ms. Rentschler.
Here.
Mr. Watts. Here. And Dr. Jenner.
Here. Let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
The motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the June 4th, 2025 meeting?
So moved.
Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. So thank you to everyone for your willingness to adjust to an afternoon time slot. I hope none of you in the audience came at 9 a.m. and then also came at 1 p.m. But today we had an unexpected but excellent visit with the U.S. Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, who stopped by Purdue, West Lafayette, really to see and praise the good work happening in Indiana education. So honor to host her for a conversation. Governor Braun, of course, was a co-host with Purdue's President Chang. So thank you for everybody's flexibility on that. We don't often get calls like that, so, but an honor to host. Couple other things that I'll flag. First of all, Greg Gastineau and William Durham, welcome back. The governor has officially reappointed you, and we're, I know as a board, so thrilled to have you back. Both of you bring key perspectives, and so congratulations to each of you. Also, yesterday at the Indiana Black Expo, Erica DeLosa was honored with the Governor's Achievement in Education Award. So she was on stage with the governor, and a lot of it is due to her work in northwestern Indiana and the area of special education, but also a big part highlighted is her leadership and work on the State Board of Education. So Erica, we are so proud of you. A huge congratulations. Also, we as a state, I don't know if some of you knew, we're going to be press releasing it soon, but we as a state were awarded by the Education Commission of the States. And the Education Commission of the States is, they have 5 representatives from every state across the country. And typically it's like the House Senate Ed Chair, Higher Ed, K-12, and one other person. But Indiana, for the first time ever, was awarded the top state for education innovation. It's called specifically the Frank Newman Award, and again, we'll be press releasing that soon. But that is an enormous compliment to all of the work happening in local communities across Indiana from a number of different partners. Of course, our educators and teachers, our community partners who come in and support the work we're doing, parents and families, But congratulations to each of you as State Board of Ed members as well. Top state in America for education innovation. The next highlight is you know what? I would call this person out because I like them a lot, but I'm just not going to do that. I'm just not going to do that. You know, now the teacher in me was ready. I was like, here we go. Answer on speaker. Who is it? For those of you online, somebody's cell phone just rang in the audience, and we will not call out that. But now everybody's panicking and like looking at their cell phones, afraid. You know, the rule at the fiscal committee is if your cell phone goes off, do you have to put money in a jar? Isn't that right? Yeah, to go to the state coffers. It's only like $1, but really you get called out. We won't do that to you. But the next thing I did want to flag is the new accountability rule has been cleared to go to LSA, which will kick off once it's posted. And we will press release as soon as it's posted, probably next week. That will kick off a 30-day public comment period. And we cannot say enough about how we need to hear from folks. That is absolutely what shaped and allowed our diploma rule to be the best it could possibly be. We know that the first draft is far from perfect, and people have suggestions that we can take forward and make better. So again, as soon as it is posted, we will press release that. That will start the 30-day time period. We will do an option where people can email in and an option for verbal comments. Then that will trigger a second draft. State Board of Ed members will likely pick up that second draft, or at least discussion on what the public comments said, so you all have a full look in September, because of course in August we'll be focused on reading, and our iRead scores will be in at that time. So again, wanted to flag that. Today we have two very important presentations. The first is Len Schemmel, our Deputy Chief Academic Officer, and Anna Schultz, our Chief Academic Officer. They're going to present data and key takeaways from the 2025 ILEARN. We're looking forward to seeing that. And then the second presentation that we'll have is Ron Sandlin, our Chief Innovation Officer, will lay out Indiana's game plan for our federal waiver request. We will likely be the second in the nation to move that forward. So again, that's going to trigger a public comment period as well prior to us submitting to USDOE, but more on that shortly. Any other board comments and reports?
I would just like to thank you and obviously the governor for giving this honor to serve on the board 4 more years. It's been a great joy of my life. You know, the last couple of years, I feel like we're all rolling in the same direction, just passing great policy. You're just starting to see that with the diplomas, you know, the 3 tiers, and it's just really, I think we're moving the needle as a board, and that's exciting, and just the mentors and the friends I have on this board has just been wonderful for me. And then second, one of my former students reached out to me. I didn't know this, but she works for the Colts now. Jim Irsay stole her, and she works for Kicking the Stigma, which was something near and dear to Mr. Irsay and his family. And so they hosted yesterday at the Colts complex about 100 coaches, and they're just not football coaches, they're coaches from wherever. It's like $15. Yeah. 5 hours just talking about how do we address the mental health crisis that's going on with our student athletes. And of course, as a teacher, I put students first because they're in my class, right? And it was just very empowering. And it just meant the world that the Colts would just open their doors up and bring experts in. They brought 2 experts in from Canada over, obviously, hockey analogies, which I really didn't understand as a football guy. You know, just a couple nuggets just to share with everybody as the school year gets ready to go. That was so interesting that, you know, instead of asking a kid as they walk down the hallway, there's not right. Don't ask how they're doing. How are you feeling? Yeah. Well, we all know that. Right? But sometimes, are you doing all right? And they'll just sort of keep walking, but keep planting those seeds because you just don't know. They're sleepy, they're tired. maybe they're tired and they're sleepy because they know your classroom's where they feel safe, right? So ask the why of why are you tired in my class all the time? Instead of 30 years ago, GG here, it wouldn't have been like, why are we sleeping in class today? It'd be like, I'm a product of a Catholic education, right? We're gonna get down to business, right? And so what I learned yesterday, I wish I would have known 32 years ago.
Yeah.
As a teacher and a coach, right? And the other nugget I thought was really interesting, and Brett, my former student who was 3-sport athlete, went to Michigan State, she shared this story about sometimes it's your high achievers, your 4-1 students, you're the poster child of Ham Southeastern athletics, right? That they're the ones hurting the most sometimes, but they got to wear the mask. You know, in my class, we read this article about the hardest job in the world about being president, and a president has to wear a mask. And how, George Bush had to wear a mouth guard. He's grinding his teeth so hard. President Obama had the same reoccurring nightmare, right? Because the pressure on there, when we're talking about 16, 17, 8-year-old kids getting ready for life, and once again, one of the reasons I love our new diploma, because now they've got a pathway in school, maybe they're going to learn what they want to learn, right? But I just think sometimes we've got to think about those high achievers, even those of us that are older, we got to learn to take care of each other and just check in and make sure we're doing okay. So thank you.
What great wisdom. Thank you for sharing that. And again, it's our honor to have you back on the board. So, and you mentioned a good point as a teacher, mid-July, it wasn't always this way. But in Indiana, mid-July means in a week or 2 weeks, we will be back in school. So I know many of our folks are gearing up. I think I heard somebody say the first teacher day is August 1st. So we'll be eager to welcome students soon. And great point, ask how you're feeling. Yeah. Thank you, Greg. Anybody else? Yes, William.
I ditto those sentiments of Greg. I sent an email to yourself and also to the governor to thank you all for my reappointment, but I want to publicly say thank you as well. I thoroughly enjoy the work of the Indiana State Board of Education, and I've shared that this work is not work that I do to pad a resume or get a pat on the back, but I do it because I want to do what's best for kids in the state of Indiana. So thank you all for this opportunity.
Again, thrilled to have you as well, William. Fantastic perspectives you add. 4 more years. 4 more years. Erica, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, I realized we was beginning to speak out of turn earlier, but I really wanted to say thank you to the governor's office and the Indiana Civil Rights Commission, as well as the Black Expo, and definitely you, Katie and David, for being so supportive. And my family had a great time. We all had a great time. I felt so honored and appreciated. I'm just so thankful to be a part of this work, a part of this team, and just thank you so much for all that went on yesterday, all the work that was put into it, all the people that contributed to make such a successful day for me and my family, as well as the other honorees, and I'm just grateful. Thank you.
And Erica, you had 2 of your 6 kids there, 2 teenagers, and I think sometimes in those moments where parents are recognized, watching the kids is the most interesting, and your kids were just beaming. They were so proud of you, and what a role model they have at home. So thank you. Anyone?
Can I just say that
yeah.
On our way there, I thanked my kids for, coming, and my family for coming to be with me. And my son said, well, I didn't really get asked. And I said, well, okay, but as soon as we got there, he's like, Mom, you know what? I apologize. I'm so glad I'm here.
Wow.
Magnitude of everything, but I just thought it was hilarious to share. I'm like, oh, you didn't get asked? Okay. So they all had a great time. He's like, I got a picture with the governor. So I just wanted to share that. My family had an amazing
Tom, is I think what she was gonna say, but it's frozen. So anybody else? Board member comments? All right. So public comments. Do we have any in the back? I don't think so. Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
The motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And then now let's get to new business. We'll start with the ILEARN presentation, followed by the federal waiver.
Great. Well, thank you for having Anna and I here this afternoon so that we could share some updates around the ILEARN and the SAT results, and then an update around the ILEARN Through Your Assessment pilot, which 2 years ago I brought to you, and then some ongoing math and ELA supports that we want to share. So there's our agenda that I just talked about. All right, so first let's look at the 2024-2025 ILEARN results. First, a few reminders before we get into the actual data tables. The charts include the raw scores from the 24-25 administration for grades 3 through 8 in math and in ELA. You may recall that in 2023, we streamlined the Indiana academic standards. So for this administration, we were able to pull out some standards without compromising the comparability or having to do a standard setting. So we had used an adjusted blueprint to support that streamlining and to support those removal of the standards for our educators. In 2025-2026 school year, the assessment only will include the 2023 standards, and then we'll have standard setting next year, so our results will be delayed a little bit. The results that we're sharing do not include students who took the alternate assessment, IM, and then the proficiency results include the total students who were at and above proficiency. And a reminder that the assessment is electronic, it's a computer adaptive assessment taken electronically unless there's an accommodation for paper. So statewide, 40.6% of Indiana students are proficient in ELA on the Indiana ILEARN assessment. This is a decrease of 0.4 percentage points from last year. As we look at the chart on the next slide, you'll see that our ELA data is relatively flat over time. Statewide for math, 42.1% of Indiana students are proficient in math based on the Indiana ILEARN, which is a 1.4 percentage point increase from last year across all grade levels. And then you'll see in the math table that collectively our math scores continue to grow. So let's look at the breakdown then. We saw the overall. This table shows ELA by grade level as well as overall. We can see an increase of 1.7 percentage points at grade 3 and smaller increases at grades 5 and 8 with 0.5 percentage points and 0.1 percentage points of increase respectively. The other grade levels have dropped, most significantly at grade 7 with a 3.9 percentage point decrease. Anna will review some of the initiatives and supports for grades K through 3 that are helping to contribute to that growth that we're seeing in grade 3. You may remember, though, a few months ago, we talked about our NAEP scores. And I shared a chart of our average scale score growth by percentile bands. And we saw in grade 4, if you think back to that we saw growth across all grades, and then most significantly at the lower percentile bands, that 10th and the 25th percentile. So I think then some of that growth is why we're seeing here in grade 5. This chart represents our ELA percentage point change from 2021 to 2025 by grade level. It does illustrate, again, some of the efforts that we've taken in the early literacy, we think, which Anna will go into detail, and then also the need for some supports at our secondary level and some movement in that area.
Yeah, I would just flag, and I've talked to each of the board members. So overall, ELA is stagnant when you look at the overall, and math is growing, math is moving. But I think when you start to dig down into the data, and I know schools will do this as well, as you pointed out, Lynn, the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade are moving. Where we're seeing the major lag in data are our late middle schoolers, 7th and 8th grade. And I know talking to several people on the board and schools, there's a lot of conversation about adolescent reading. And we're doing a lot for early interventions, But I mean, you can see, and Pat, I don't know if you want to chime in here, but I mean, you made an important observation to me prior to the meeting about kind of your hypothesis
Yeah.
about, and if you could pull that mic a little bit closer.
Yeah, these are, I mean, we have to remember, these are our students who intermittently came to school during the pandemic, and we've still not caught up. And the skill set that they've lost during that time, this is kind of just what we're gonna see for a while until we can get their skills developed. So I think, you know, as I look at this chart, all right, I look at grade 3 last year at 38.6, and now they're at 41.4. Okay, so we're building skills as we've made the emphasis in literacy, but we can't forget those kids who didn't have that emphasis in their education, in some places for a year and a half. And they're gonna constantly be catching up. I am confident that our teachers across the state are growing them. It's just that the gap that they have to overcome is a lot larger.
And what's interesting, and maybe we can talk about this after you speak on math, is math, we're seeing our kids move. But Lynn, why don't you go ahead and share math, and then we'll have further discussion.
Sure, so here are our overall math results by grade level. We're seeing results across all grades, or growth across all grades except grade 3. In the past, you know, I remember Scott Bass usually sits to the right of me when I talk, but he's not here today, he's on screen. But we talk about, oh, we're only growing 0.1 or 0.2 percentage points. So this year we're seeing, you know, percentages way above that. We're seeing growth over 1 percentage point, with grade 7 a 2 percentage point increase, grade 8 a 3.1 percentage point increase. And I think that's something for us to watch. You know, I'll talk about SAT later, but if we watch that over time, how is that going to, you know, be illustrated, you know, in a few years from now? Another chart similar to the ELA one that we just looked at, so growth over time. So as Mr. Mapes, you know, mentioned, you know, we're still working on, you know, achieving some of those losses that we had from the pandemic. So we're still growing, we're not there yet, but this is a good sign that over time, we haven't grown in each of the grade levels each year, but over time we're showing some great growth.
Yeah, and I'll just, maybe we'll keep going for now, but put a pin in this for board members on any additional takeaways with, again, math scores moving, but that adolescent middle school ELA period still struggling. Keep going, Lynn.
Okay, so let's move to each of our student population groups and review their performances. This chart displays ethnicity, and then the representation of the total population. The student population is there at the bottom for each group. So for ethnicity, for our ELA results, all groups saw decreases except our Black and our Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander students, and our Black students grew just under 1 percentage point for ELA. For math, across the same groups, all areas grew, with the largest growth for our Black and Hispanic students with 2 percentage points each. This is much different from last year, as overall our math results had decreased, so there were decreases among most of these groups. Moving to special education results, for ELA, our special education students grew 1.3 percentage points, the largest jump over the 21-25 timeframe. And then our general education students dropped 0.7 percentage points. Moving to math, both general education students and special education students grew, and both groups have grown most years over that time from 21 to 25. For our English learners in ELA, they recorded the largest drop that they've had, 1.1 percentage points, and non-English learners dropped 0.2 percentage points. In math, our English learners grew 0.6 percentage points, and our non-English learners grew 1.6 percentage points. And then lastly, the group based on socioeconomic status. In ELA, no change for students who receive free or reduced price meals, while students with paid meals dropped almost 1 percentage point. In math, both groups grew, with students who receive free or reduced price meals growing 1.4 percentage points and paid meals 1.2 percentage point increase. So then maybe if this is a time, if you have anything, these are just some summaries of what was in those tables. So this slide here summarizes the growth chart with the grades 3 through 6 showing an increase over time. And as Dr. Jenner pointed out, those students in grades 3, 4, 5 have benefited from some of our literacy efforts over the last 3 years. And then while grades 7 and 8 were showing decreases. For ELA, we saw our largest increase and decrease this year, with the increase in grade 3 and the decrease in grade 7. In contrast, math has grown over time, and I believe will continue to do so with some of the initiatives and supports that we're leading and providing. We saw the largest increase this year in math, which was in grade 8. And then students in grades 5 and 8 have seen increases each year in both math and ELA. For the specific student population, since 2021, the math proficiency rates for all students has grown. In 2025, Black students have that year-over-year increase in both ELA and math, and the highest percentage point of increase for all students in ELA. And then Black and Hispanic students have had the highest year-over-year percentage point increase in math. Continuing with the specific student population, students in special education had year-over-year increases in both ELA and math, and a greater year-over-year increase in ELA than their general education peers. Our students with free and reduced price meals had a greater year-over-year increase in math than students that did not receive those free and reduced price meals. And then our English learners had a year-over-year increase in math and a 1.1 percentage point increase in ELA in 2024. Any additional comments or thoughts or questions?
I think now the big question is, again, we're moving in some areas. We've got to pick it up and make sure all of our middle school kids are reading, provide those additional supports. So this part of the presentation is probably my favorite, which is what can we do to help? What can we do to continue improving? So let's jump right in, Lynn.
All right, perfect. So our ILEARN 3-year assessment system, as I mentioned, it was 2 years ago at this time that I brought the idea to you. We're still doing a deep dive into the data, combining our latest survey results with the ILEARN results. But we are getting some anecdotal stories and reports from various districts, corporations that have shared that their efforts with fidelity of utilizing the resources that we've created and provided and or the test administration, administering it as it was intended, they're seeing some great growth in their summative scores. So we look forward to monitoring this over time, as well as the results that we get from this deep dive. And while it's called an assessment system, when I talk about it, I've really turned to talking about it as a learning system, because it's really brought about the intertwining of standards, instruction, assessment, and interventions. Some reminders that began our efforts in this work. In 2022, we had the House Enrolled Act 1251 that required us to streamline our standards by 25% and then prioritize no more than 1/3 of those standards as essential standards. And it also called for the redesign of ILEARN. And then following up in 2024, we had House Enrolled Act 1243, which provided the opportunity then to move ILEARN from a summative to a 3-year assessment. Right now, there are 20 states that are in some form, either have already implemented for a year or two, they're in a pilot, or they're putting their model together. And then why did we choose a 3-year assessment system? We had a lot of feedback from our educators, parents, and families that wanted more real-time actionable data to better support student learning. So during the 2024-2025 school year, we conducted our pilot, and we adjusted, we added to, and we collected feedback throughout the year. So it was pretty exciting. So a little over a year ago, we asked for an opt-in, and we thought maybe 50 schools will join us, and we had 1,350 schools join us. So that was over 75% of schools across Indiana, and it was even more corporations, because in some corporations, maybe just 2 schools of the 8 possible piloted. So They were, kind of dipping their toes in the water and getting an early look of how things were. So while that was awesome, there was a lot of pressure and demands, throughout the year, but it was great because we got a lot of feedback. So that was great. 1,350 signed up. Did they actually do it? And they did. And so then we began thinking about, okay, this is great. How is this going to play out as far as math and ELA? How many were going to participate? Because they could opt in for one content area. They could opt in for one classroom. They could opt in for a whole grade level. There were choices. And so it was balanced across. There were 360,000 students that participated in math, 360,000 students that participated in ELA. It wasn't the same for each. So that really gave us, again, a lot of good data, a lot of great feedback. And then we thought, okay, are we going to be heavy at the elementary or the secondary? But it was pretty nicely spread out. About 75% of each grade level participated. So it varied from 56,000 to 62,000 across each grade level. And then as we did various presentations and put out surveys, and while we were building the 3-year assessment system during last year, we collected a lot of feedback, had a lot of participation on committees and focus groups. So we estimate we've had over 6,500 educators that provided feedback for us and continue to do so. So a reminder of the way the ILEARN 3-year assessment system works. There are 3 checkpoints for math, 3 for ELA, that have key focus standards that they're comprised of that are administered in 9 to 11 week windows during the school year. There is an opportunity too for those students who need a retake after they've received some interventions and remediation. That's open until the summative, and then we've shortened the summative to accommodate for that extra testing throughout the year. So our theory of action then, and this is key because as we went out that first bullet, 120 professional development opportunities that my team provided, we saw that some had more knowledge of the system than others. And the theory of action, and every state's doing it differently. They have different issues that they were trying to solve. Our theory of action is all about the opportunity to learn. And so our model then is that students learn the standards first, then they are assessed, then the data is reviewed, and then there's that time for interventions and more supports. We know sometimes that takes a few weeks or longer, and so that's why that opportunity too is open until the summative starts, but it gives students that opportunity to learn the material, to grow in their concepts and skills so that they're reaching that proficiency by the end of the school year. We had a lot of ahas during those professional development opportunities, and what we've done, the teaching and learning team and the assessment teams collaboratively together have improved our instructional and assessment supports, and one of those is through the item specifications. And while these are typically used for item writers, it's really about getting ready for instruction and learning, and it's defining what it means to be proficient. And so as we showed some example items at some of our professional development opportunities, some of the teachers were like, wow, I thought I was, teaching that proficient when it was really, I was teaching at approaching proficiency. And so it's really given a guide as they're reviewing the materials, thinking about their activities, their instruction. One of the districts that we worked with said, now we know what the target is. We didn't understand that target before. And so again, a lot of, with all of these outreach opportunities, we've had, again, a lot of great feedback and then opportunities to support and inform. As I mentioned, greater focus on learning and instruction versus the assessment, bringing people into a room, curriculum vendors, the assessment vendor, educators and parents together, and not so much focused on taking a test, but the learning and instruction that's occurring, that then the assessment comes after that. So just a lot of great opportunity there to continue that focus on learning and instruction. Our goal was to reduce testing time, so we're doing that, increased accessibility for students, and then also an improved student experience, and I'll give you some examples of those. There's really a lot.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
I apologize for interrupting you, but that third bullet point, I've been on this board a long time, and that is something that teachers in schools have begged for decades, not to just give us an autopsy of did our kids get it or did they not get it. Like, it truly is focused on learning and instruction, and I know you covered it, but like, I don't think people understand how big of a transition that was to truly being student-focused on learning and not just, did you get this or not? And if you didn't, then too bad. Like, that is truly probably the biggest swing I've seen for the state to recognize, hey, we're gonna do throughout the year testing, and that is what teachers and schools have begged for literally a decade, and for you guys to get there is pretty awesome, so good job.
I appreciate that, Mr. Watts. This is a good segue to this slide because we are getting a lot of great input and feedback on the supports that we've built. And there's a lot here, and I'm not going to like click on a link or anything, but just to give you a quick overview, it really begins with that assessment framework. You had mentioned 2 years ago that for this design, you wanted it to be focused on essential standards. And so that's what we set out to do. So the assessment framework is that blueprint, so it shows the essential standards and the other standards when they're assessed over time. So this is kind of that start for schools, is to begin thinking about, this is what my instruction looks like for the year. That left-hand column in that upper right assessment framework, that's where those item specs, they're linked for each standard. So again, knowing what that target is. So each standard is broken down into 3+1 levels, into proficiency level descriptors, learning progression. So 3 levels of learning that it takes to reach mastery, plus the one that above proficiency is what's next. And so there's PLD, proficiency level descriptor maps, that are linked at the top of each column. So that's really your learning continuum for the year. So teachers can map that out. They can map where their kids fell. Again, it's a scope and sequence we're adding. We've had a lot of feedback about, well, we have these other standards too. Where should they be taught? And so we'll be adding a line in there about, that extra scope and sequence support to help them. Moving to the left then with the instructional frameworks. So we know, our scope and everything. We know what standards we're going to need to teach so that we're ready for the assessment. Our kids have had that opportunity. But now we need to go deep into our standards. And so these instructional frameworks have really been expanded. We had another educator group last week for math. We've got one that's going on right now for ELA. And what's really cool is that these are getting talked about nationwide, and they're even being talked about internationally, because some of our higher ed partners have done some presentations elsewhere. So I told them no pressure, but these are again being talked about and looked at and dissected and utilized. But these instructional frameworks go into great detail about each standard. Clarifications, misconceptions. For math, we're adding manipulatives and models. We know that's not how we learned, and so we want to support teachers in that area. But then, one of the biggest things when teachers were getting their data, they're like, now what? What's our next steps? So those proficiency level descriptors that we've broken the standards down into, what these educator groups that are coming together this month for us, they're helping us to add all the concepts and skills. And so there's a prior knowledge skills section. And then under each PLD, there's the concepts and skills that are related to that PLD and that level of instruction. And so a teacher, after he or she gets the test results, they can go looking at that proficiency level descriptor and say, okay, yep, in this classroom, my kids know this, but this next bullet, they don't. And so it's giving them some areas where they can start. There's tier 2 and tier 3 supports that are built in. We have on the ELA, there's a science of reading area, there's suggested text. So really an expansion, to really support, again, that instruction that's occurring. And if I had time, I'd love to pull it up.
I would just ask that there's a lot of new principals getting ready to start for the first time being a building level principal. And if we can make certain they know where this resource is, yes, right? An email and information that, hey, here's something to help you as a leader in your building with your teachers, because there has been a lot of turnover across the state, and there may be some people who were assistant principals that became principals, but this wasn't their focus. They had other things to do in building, so.
And Pat, I would add to that point, and Lynn, if you want to go back to that other slide, I got a random text from a teacher friend who said, oh my gosh, and it was after the school year, just discovered these resources. How long have they been out? So I'm like texting Lynn, how long have they been out? Lynn's like, they've been out for about 6 or 7 months. And so we've been also trying to think through, okay, leadership does change. Like, how can we, directly send it to our teachers so that they have it on the ready? Because this, and Lynn, you're being very, very humble. When I travel around, people are constantly asking me about our assessment system, which is probably one of, you can get way weedy when it comes to assessment, and psychometricians and all the things. So I'm usually like, here's Lynn's phone number, talk to her. But you all have done, I think, an incredible job pulling in teachers to say, okay, is this helpful or no? If this isn't helpful, let's not do it. What would be helpful? And so we've had teachers say, okay, this is good, but can we also do this? And so I just want to compliment, you and your team for listening to our teachers. And that is truly, I know from you, what is informed. The feedback has informed through the pilot, but also these resources, and we want to keep hearing that for sure. And a point of clarification, the checkpoint pilot moved with 75% of schools who opted in. The ILEARN that we gave in the spring is what I'm gonna call the old ILEARN, because we had to have the pilot. I'm asking this as a question. I want you to disagree with me, because I want to make sure. If I remember correctly, the pilot was in order to inform the future ILEARN, and that future ILEARN will be built out for this coming spring.
So it's all one system.
Yeah.
So in the past, we had a summative at the end of the school year.
Right.
And then what do you do with those results? So, it's for program evaluation. It's maybe to think about what gaps you have in your curriculum and instruction, what PD might you need. There wasn't a lot we could do with it. So we wanted to move to a through year to get actionable data at the time when we could act upon it with individual kids. And so that, we could grow their skills and knowledge and performances.
Yeah, and
But
I
there will
probably
sti-
didn't ask that question very well. I know that.
Okay.
But
there will still
what
be a
I'm
summative.
asking is, the ILEARN assessment that we gave this past spring was the ILEARN assessment that we've always given. It was not informed by the pilot, which I believe you've shared in the past will be the next ILEARN, which is informed. That's what I'm trying to get to.
We made adjustments to the summative the end of the year. And I
Okay.
mentioned about the adjusted blueprint. We were able to make other adjustments over time. For example, we knew that there still has to be a summative. We have to assess the
Right.
depth and the breadth. The summative is the scale scores for accountability.
Yes.
So we'll still have a summative every year. Remember the checkpoints are only assessing, for the most part, the essential standards. So
Right.
there's those other standards. But we knew we wanted to reduce testing time. So we were moving towards no math performance task. So that'll be next year, because we're embedding, some of those skills and concepts throughout the year. We've got some updated process standard items, for example, where kids are actually doing math. They're taking data, they're manipulating variables, and then responding to questions, so simulation type questions that we haven't had before. ELA, we wanted to reduce that time and for the performance task, and we wanted the focus to be on writing. So we wanted to reduce that reading load. So we actually, as we were talking with schools, because we were doing these focus groups and presentations and getting feedback, we decided to move on that earlier. So we actually,
That's good
this
to know.
year with ILEARN, we moved from 2 days of 2 parts of the ELA performance task to 1 day and 1 part. And so now when the students read, and we're reducing the amount of reading they have to do, lowering the Lexile again, because we want to focus on the writing. We want to see how they're doing on those standards. And so they have fewer passages to read, and then the prompt that they're responding to is over the same passages that they read. So we actually implemented some things this year.
Got it.
And then, that gave us great detail. And honestly, for that's another way to tout educators helping us out. When we wanted to go in this direction, we needed to try out our rubrics
Yes.
and to get some exemplars. So we sent out an all call like, hey, anybody want to pilot some writing prompts for us so we can get some feedback, so we could get our scoring engines ready and give schools, information. And we did. We had schools come forward and they gave writing prompts in January and February to help us out. And so that schools
Great.
could use those as guides.
Thank you. That answers it. So we accelerated the timeline.
As
then
much as
from-
we could without
from
standard setting,
what we
yeah.
heard as a board last year, we accelerated it. So the
Yeah.
pilot informed the springs, but it will inform even more so
Yeah.
next spring.
Yep.
Thank you for
Yep,
that
and
clarification.
and we're not done yet. I mean, there's still areas that we want to improve upon, and when Mr. Mapes was, talking about, the administrators. I couldn't put everything on this slide. Courtney told me I couldn't add all the bullets. I can only put one or two.
She tells me that too.
Yeah, so.
I get it.
So.
She does.
We actually had quite a few, again, based on all that feedback. So tried to highlight a couple of them for each, but, for educators, I mentioned those frameworks, and again, if anybody wants to know more about those, I'd love to sit down, or if your teachers don't know about them, happy to go over them. Another area is the algebra predecessor skills. We know that, there's been a lot of research out there about being successful in algebra and what those concepts and skills that are needed are. So we're making sure those are added in these instructional frameworks. We revised our policies for test administration. And so, in the past, when we gave the summative, schools shut down, right? All learning stopped. These checkpoints are just another day in the life of the year. My classroom's ready. We've gone over these standards. I feel confident they're ready. Let's check it out. But the classroom next door might not be ready for a couple days, and that's okay. So it was a lot of that type of understanding. When schools opted in, some didn't know all of that. So that first checkpoint, they gave it on the first day, right out of the gate. And then when we did our PD opportunities, we're like, oh, wait, that's how it was supposed to be? And then they adjusted it for the rest of the year. We talked a lot about, who can give the test, and freed up, some test security things around the checkpoints. Because again, those are lower stakes. They're all about learning.
And who can give the test has been a big flag that our school counselors have raised routinely. So I do want to mention that. The goal is to provide flexibility for our school leaders to be better equipped and allowed to make that call.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't have to be certified, this person or that.
And we did that for the checkpoints. It's still required for the summative, but just knowing we were adding these amounts of assessments and, really stretching maybe, a special education teacher and how many small groups they can lead. Let's let the IAs give the assessment. Let's let the IAs give the makeup. Let's think through this. So again, a lot of that feedback came from the IPLA conferences that we went to that, principals and assistant principals were raising their hand and said, okay, let's take that back and figure it out. And we did for that second checkpoint and on. For parents and families, next year there'll be a family portal. And so instead of schools having to, provide secure ways to send home the reports, now the Cambium has a family portal, so parents will get a code that they can put that code in. They can get access to the reports all throughout the year. There'll be links to our resources. And so, when we have resources on the Learning Lab or the next bullet there talks about video and instructional guides, I'm really excited about this one. This one came from a USED CGSA, a competitive grant for state assessments. But we are working with vendors now, getting started on this project with standard spotlights. Those will be videos for families and a different video for educators over some of the standards. We're going to build a library over time, but then to accompany those spotlights, there'll be guides, instructional guides. So for families, they can work through activities at home, and then for educators to, again, think about the breakdown of the standard, any misconceptions, maybe some modeling of some of that. To help support intervention. So really excited about that.
Before you move on, can I just make a quick comment?
Mm-hmm.
In a previous life, when I taught middle school, we did this with our students actually. After every single test, we would have a one-on-one with them, and we had a similar chart of like, hey, this is where you're at. This is what we can do to help you get better. And I would just encourage, this is so good to see, but let's get this information in the hands of the kids so they understand, why am I sitting here and taking this test? And unpacking it with them right away makes such an incredible difference so that they feel empowered. So as a competency-based teacher in 2008, 2009, taking standardized tests were not scary for my kids because they were able to understand exactly what it meant. And afterwards, it was just another opportunity to check how we were doing. And it makes such a difference. So I'm just ecstatic to see this, and I hope that we can figure out communication so that every single teacher, educator in the state knows these resources are there. Because if we can get it into the hands of the kids as early as possible so that they understand why they have to take these tests, personally, we just saw a tremendous increase in the testing of our students.
Yeah,
so.
Thank you, Mrs. Hamill. And and as we think about, we are replacing these checkpoints with other interims and formatives that schools have been using. And those various vendors have specific supports. And one of those, for example, are goals setting, based on how they do. So, that would be something good for educators to do. They also have specific reports or plans. And so we're working with our assessment vendor to put put together an individual student learning plan, so based on how they did, since we have those PLDs, the learning progressions and the concepts and skills, then all of that can be in a ready-made plan that then either the teacher, could tell an IA, hey, can you go work on this for the next couple weeks? These are the concepts and skills we need to do. Or my kid's going to a tutor, so a family could take it. We're working on, like groupings of kids too. So, all the kids in my class, they scored this way. And so I know that this is the work they need. And so, again, kind of some of those ready-made reports that we aren't used to with our wide-scale end-of-the-year assessment.
Yeah, it's nice to see the individualization coming, because the tech is here, so
Yeah.
we should be doing it.
Yeah.
It's great.
And then for students, an area that I'm really excited about, the API Cambium has, it's called ClearFrame API. But what this allows us to do, in the past, schools have given these extra formatives and interims outside of our state assessments. And then the data that the students receive from those assessments was then ingested into that vendor or another vendor's programs for individualized learning paths. Well, I've been working with curriculum vendors to do this with our data. And so they are rebuilding their systems on the back end to ingest our data into their systems. And so we piloted 3 vendors this year. It was IXL, Edmentum, and Learning A to Z. And so we had 5 corporations for each of those vendors that the educators and administrators participated, and then we had focus groups with them and got additional survey feedback, and we're expanding that this next year to Curriculum Associates is going to come alongside of us with this work. Renaissance Learning is coming alongside of us. They're also implementing they have EduClimber, which is a data visualization tool. And so not only are we using them for intervention systems and these individualized learning paths, but also to help support administrators and districts making plans, looking at student growth so that they don't have to take that time to download our data and then have someone in their corporation upload the data, get it personalized some way. These companies are coming alongside of us and figuring it out on the back end and then just taking the data right away to save that time. So anyway, I could go on, but I need to turn this over to Anna Schultz, our Chief Academic Officer, and she's going to talk about some other specific math and literacy supports.
Sure, thanks, Lynn. So the best part about hearing from Lynn today is that it's the lines are really blurry when it comes to the fact that even though her title is one that is in the realm of assessment, and there's 49 of hers all across the country, she speaks from this place of assessment not being one data point in time, and that whole continuum of work, which I think, Mr. Watts, is what you were alluding to as well. So everything that Lynn has shared with you guys today is really coming from a place of understanding this system of learning, right? And that we have our standards that is guiding what is on our assessment, that is dovetailing into what is happening within the classroom. The interventions align with that. But in a much broader scale, we have a responsibility to own this data, certainly. There we go. To own this data and to have conversations about the now what, and how do we support our schools through that. I'd like to highlight real briefly, though, that Dr. Jenner did mention that next month our focus will be on iRead. And so today we'll dance around a bunch of literacy supports. We'll talk heavily about that next month. So if there's certain questions, ideas, thoughts, certainly flag those for us and we can make sure that we address them. This particular slide is one that I'm sure everybody has memorized because we have been celebrating certainly the financial contributions and the commitment from Lilly, for sure, other philanthropic entities, from our legislative support for the last several years, right? So an unheard of amount of financial resources has been pouring into this area deemed literacy and literacy instruction. The department, well before my time here, got to work immediately at defining, okay, so what does this really mean? Whoops, maybe I went backwards. What does this mean? What does this look like? And what are we gonna do with this, with these resources? This slide Lynn touched upon in a slightly different way earlier in her presentation, but it is important to highlight the fact that as we think about investing these dollars into ways that will benefit students, it's not about what will benefit them on the day they take ILEARN as a third grader or what will benefit them on iRead when they take it. It really is about how do we define the foundational literacy skills within that K-3 time frame, so you have about 4 years in there, before research really starts to shift at the end of grade 3, as students are looking at what is the difference between learning to read and reading to learn. And so this particular visual is pretty encouraging to me, and it shows us that the work that is happening in the state's literacy cadre, the work that is happening with science of reading legislation that supports teachers' professional development, licensure requirements, the work that is happening with screeners and our formative assessments is really a system that allows for a pipeline of students over time to build the skills that they need. I am a lousy speller, but I'm really good on spelling tests because I can memorize what I have to do for Friday, and then on Monday I don't know how to spell the word again. This ensures that that does not happen. It is a system of supports that is building the key skills that scholars need in order to thrive regardless of ILEARN existed or not, which I think is a really important delineation. So the green on the left-hand side, the green on the left-hand side is showing us that those students, the first year that this intensive literacy support and a coordinated effort statewide really went into place, those scholars in grade 3 at that time were first graders, right? And so we're looking at 4 years that students typically would have of really rigorous focused science of reading instruction and learning opportunities. That first group of kiddos this year in grade 3 wasn't able to take advantage of all 4 years just based on the rollout, and then certainly it impacted those students after them. Our scholars in the red on the right-hand side had passed the grade levels that these efforts originally targeted, which then leads into the conversation that was mentioned a little bit earlier, and that is, okay, so now what happens when you have students that are grade 4 and above, and what does literacy support continue to look like for these students? And we will certainly touch upon that as we move forward. Questions upon this view or how we're looking at it? It provides some encouragement to me to say what we are doing in those early grade levels for scholars that have been able to take advantage of all of it based on when those efforts started in 22 and 23 is certainly paying off and working.
Yeah, I would just say, because I was here back then, the real focus with that initial investment, as you remember, was all about early literacy. And again, I think that adolescent time period, we have to urgently work through. And that could look like working with philanthropy. It could be if we have middle schools who are showing promising data, really understanding what they're doing. I had a middle school teacher approach me on the 4th of July, and she said, she's an ELA teacher, and she said, 6th grade, she said, I really want my other teachers to see my data because it was so strong. And she as a teacher was able to point to some of the why, but so often as teachers, we hold our data pretty close, and you only see the overall school score. So some open data conversations, we might have to really push in those middle grades.
Yeah, I think for sure. No might, I think for sure. The other piece, Dr. Jenner, that's really interesting, I think, about the situation you just shared is stereotypically, so this is a broad brush, right? But traditionally, 6th grade teachers and middle school teachers love their subject area. They own their subject area. They know their subject area really well. But I teach science. I'm not an ELA teacher. I don't teach reading, right? And so you look at what is that content area literacy looks like. What are the conversations about literacy that are happening as this grade levels increase? Everybody owns that literacy data. Everybody has a piece of that data. So when we talk about adolescent literacy, it's not simply I don't know, I was gonna say like bearing down is a better word, or doubling down on what's happening in those foundational grades. It is recognizing their data looks different, their content looks different, those expertise of the teachers is different, rooted in different areas. All of those contribute to the open conversations about reading, for sure, for sure, for sure. The next slide backwards again. The next slide starts to look a little bit at that adolescent literacy through a realm of supports. I would look at the first bar and the bottom bar in tandem. So we know now that iRead is continuing several years past that third grade year. And if a student is still in a place of finding the content on iRead being difficult to pass with a level of mastery that then carries over into other subject levels, the school, and I certainly us here at the department, have a massive sense of responsibility to provide the school with resources to pour into the student for additional supports. Schools have gotten strong at this, they do this really well, but when we think about that bottom bar and it looks at monitoring progress of those that do not pass iRead and providing remediation aligned to the science of reading, is taking the conversation to a different level. As you are aware, the department has had an approved vendor list for curricular materials that really targets what is happening during Tier 1 instruction. That's the instruction that all students are receiving during that 90 minutes. The next step of that is, all right, so if you have students that are struggling with their grade level content, what are we providing them for the areas of remediation to help close that gap in those skills? And this bullet is really looking at the guidance that the department has released regarding what schools do to provide that extra support for students. So this is making sure that they follow response to intervention. This is making sure that families are notified with the specifics of the areas that the students are struggling with and providing that additional supports to families at home. This is looking at making sure that the curriculum that they select is evidence-based. And it's being very, very clear that this time that the students have for intervention is crucial. It's not something that is happening at the end of the day when somebody has time. It's embedded into the daily instruction. One of the benefits, certainly, of the work that the department has able to do based on the generosity of philanthropic efforts thus far is really support what do reading coaches look like in schools, what is their training, how are they being deployed to support populations of students and teachers that are working with students really specifically and honing in on those academic gaps. So we view the top bar and the bottom bar going together. Lynn has done an awesome job really of sharing all things about the through-year assessment. I would just highlight in the second bar, this is starting to look at Lexile scores, and Lexile scores are matching the complexity of a text, the level of rigor within a particular passage, and the student's ability to be able to decipher that content, very much rooted in comprehension, being able to understand it. So this would be, I can read a book at a kindergarten level really well. I read it really fast. I know all the words. My sight words are great. But when those sight words are all of a sudden in a fourth grade text, it doesn't mean that I'm able to transfer the same ability to comprehend within that particular text. So when we look at infusing Lexile scores on ILEARN and these become a part of the checkpoints, the other piece of data that provides teachers, as Lynn alluded to before, is really correlated back to their instruction. So it's not just Anna is not deemed a proficient reader either on iRead or on ILEARN. It's what is Anna's particular reading ability and how does that align with the text that I'm asking Anna to digest either independently or as a part of our grade 3 instruction. Lexile scores are not new to teachers. I'm sure they have been craving it as well. It's things that they use in their classroom constantly to help monitor how we find books and levels of text that are just right for students. And then the third bullet is looking at extending reading supports through those adolescent grade levels. I can share with you that recently I was at an engagement with Excel and Ed based here in Indiana, and there were 36 states in the room, including us certainly, and the entire conversation was about how adolescent literacy is going to become the movement legislatively as we move forward. I think it is fair to say that certainly Indiana was a leader in all things science of reading from the jump, and other states have caught up to that, right? And now it really is, here's what your data shows. So what does that look like as we move forward? Our iRead data, as I alluded to, will be discussed next month, and we will dig into, here's what our LEARN data showed, here's how that connects and correlates to what we thought we would see on iRead or not, right? And then what are we gonna do about that, especially as the assessment of iRead continues now well beyond grade 4. Shifting the focus, Lynn had the opportunity to share good news about math. We had key pieces of legislation come out of this past session that looked at increasing foundational math skills. I had just mentioned that reading and all things science of reading has been on our legislature's radar for years and years and years, and they have been massive components and supporters of that body of work for sure. Now it's math's turn, right? So I'm sure last year, year prior, you guys were having conversations about the literacy screener, what that would look like. Now we're doing the same thing for math. It will be a numeracy screener for all K through 2 students. The department will go through a process similar to what we did for reading, that those providers provide option to schools, right, to select from an approved list. We'll see how many folks or how many options on that list, but an opportunity to select from a list from an assessment that has been vetted by the department that we believe will focus on key mathematical skills in those early grade levels, which would be like number sense, which would get into computation. And then from there, those data points that schools are able to gather from those early numeracy assessments or screeners will allow us to provide that same sort of targeted intervention that we see happening now across the state and in classrooms all over in reading. We'll be able to see that in math as well. And it allows, again, this assessment to be a part of a much broader system of learning as opposed to just one stagnant moment in time.
And Anna, we have about 4 more minutes for this one presentation, and then we'll flip to Ron. I know we have some folks who
Perfect.
have time that I don't want to be the only one sitting up here as a board member because everybody else has to leave and we lose the room. So anyway,
Perfect. Well, this is a good point then, Dr. Jenner, to end on, because this is something that came our way this past legislative season that is our opportunity to define, implement, and move forward. So many more conversations about this. This is looking at what does it mean to promote advanced coursework based on what we know about ILEARN data for students, especially within those middle school grades. And then what are our opportunities to align those efforts with teacher prep so we are ensuring that we are graduating undergrad or graduate students who want to teach in the classroom with the skills that they need to align with what our students need. And then the last one, in interest of time, has 5 or 6 additional bullets on them that really look at what is the comprehensive movement on supports in both literacy and in math that are happening now in our state that is not based on let's wait and figure it out, right? These are movements and actions, strategies that are already occurring. And to Dr. Jenner and Lynn's point before, then it becomes a responsibility certainly to ensure that these are well known and our schools are taking advantage of these opportunities for sure. The last little piece is transitioning back to SAT. I'll probably do it in the wrong direction.
Okay. Yeah, so just quickly, so the assessment didn't change, nor did any of our, cut scores or anything like that. So just a reminder, the SAT is the high school accountability assessment. The at-college ready benchmark is set by statute that we are required to administer a national college entrance exam with that cut score, and then we've added the approaching and below. The approaching proficiency means that with one more year of high school, since these are juniors taking it, that they should be college ready at the end of that. This slide just mentions that cut score, that at or the above college ready benchmark means that those students have a 75% chance or better of earning at least a C in a first semester credit bearing college course. And it does satisfy one of the components of graduation pathways. There's your cut scores. So looking at the data, you can see below college ready benchmark, this is for evidence-based reading and writing. We did decrease, that's what we want to do. We still have a large number of students there, but we want to move that below college ready in that, in that direction. And then we did increase overall for our at college ready for evidence-based reading and writing. And then for math, this one we increased some in that below college ready. So again, too many, but this is really, when I was showing you the ILEARN math results before, it'll be something to watch over time as the supports that I was describing for grades 3 through 8, we are building some of those same reports for 9-12 and K2. So to wrap our arms around the standards and the screeners, and then the SAT and the standards at these upper levels too, and the high school courses that are taken. And then you can see we had a slight jump of at college ready, but again, not where we need to be, but more work to do. So again, just kind of rounding out with that bottom statement there about it just underscores that urgency of the other work that we're doing. Making sure that we're maximizing the use of those 4 years of high school with now those multiple pathways and preparing students to succeed, whether it's enrollment, enlistment, or employment. Thank you.
Okay, so board members, I know that anytime we start to dig into the data, especially ILEARN, it's always a very intense presentation. So any additional comments or thoughts?
Just one,
Yeah,
I'll
go
be
ahead,
quick. I
BJ.
know we're pressed here, but the SAT, those students, that doesn't alarm me as much as other things, only because we administer that test that this is a college-ready exam, and we administer it to students who are not going to college, who, let's be honest, it's not important to them taking that test on that day. So that one, I don't want us to get overly nervous, because when we administer that to students that truly probably don't see a lot of value in it, and those students may have other skills that you've allowed them to recognize via the diploma, where they can shine, so that one doesn't alarm me nearly as much.
And you're saying that in a very honest way, because we saw increases in both, right?
100%.
More so one,
Yeah.
but as a board, we've talked about long-term, what are the skills that students need in high school? Does SAT fit that? And I think that's a conversation that we'll continue to have, and I see several people who are nodding, who have talked to us a lot about that.
And please, I'm not saying that's not important. I'm saying that is, I think that if we only pulled out those students that truly are college bound, I think that number changes drastically, because that test was important to them.
Yeah.
So what we've,
That's fair.
behind your leadership, allowed those students to do is recognize, hey, you want to go into the military? Hey, you want to be a welder? You're great at that. That's not on this exam, but that's where you shine. We've now given you the opportunity to be like, hey, this is where you can shine, but that doesn't show up anywhere here yet, but it will. So that was I don't want us to get too alarmed, or I'm not too alarmed, I don't think anyone else can be, because that test is given to students that truly, because we have to give it, that they may not see their place in that test.
Yeah, thank you, BJ, for that
Yeah.
comment. And Anna, Lynn, thank you very much for all your hard work. Someone asked us the other day, I think it was the High Ability Association, a great question, like, when do you get the results? We'd love to get our hands on that fast. We have some ideas coming. And we shared with them, we get the results as a state like a week before they go public. I mean, it is a very fast turnaround. So thanks for all your work. I know that's this is a high level analysis, more to come, as Lynn pointed out, with the checkpoints and otherwise. And then of course, reading coming next month. Really appreciate your work. Ron, oh yeah, BJ, were you gonna?
Sorry, you just,
Yeah, please, go ahead.
with high ability, is there any way for us to work that high ability test that is required into those checkpoints?
Oh, Lynn's jumping up. She has a big smile on her face, so She's excited to
So I
answer.
don't want to, I know we're pressed, I don't want to jump. I know
No, you're
that-
fine. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, so one of the scores that is given on each of the checkpoints on the summative is a percentile ranking, so we already incorporated that this past year. There's local, state, and national percentiles that are given, and so the checkpoints and the summative can be used depending on the timing of that identification.
Okay, so this
Great.
could truly eliminate or greatly reduce the need for the
Yeah,
summative.
some schools, that's the only reason they were giving another
Okay,
assessment, and
thank
so.
you. Sorry, I didn't mean
we
to.
It's a,
built
it's
that
a
in.
great point.
Okay.
Any additional points? I don't want to cut the conversation. Okay. The one thing I will flag, and this is, I usually do this in the beginning. Remember, ILEARN is only Indiana. So the only scores that we can compare state to state are NAEP. Every state has their own unique assessment. Even when you look at SAT scores or ACT scores, most other states test a sample. So I just want to flag that when you look at ILEARN. And then Ron has shared this in a past presentation in terms of the rigor across the board. And I'm not going to name a neighboring state, but when you see a neighboring state that has 80% proficient in math, and our NAEP ranking far exceeds their NAEP ranking, the nation has a rigor monitor on all assessments, and Indiana's assessment is one of the most rigorous in the nation. It's aligned to NAEP, actually, or as much as possible. So again, just wanted to flag that tidbit. It's so often confused. So just a note to self. Thank you. All right, Ron, let's talk about the flexibility waiver.
Excellent, thank you.
And it's interesting that Secretary was here today,
Yeah,
and we'll be submitting it straight to her.
yeah, some people would call it a
A
coincidence.
little warm-up.
Other people believe coincidences don't exist,
Yeah,
different frames.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Jenner, and would highlight before I dive in, this will be a brief presentation that preempts the public release of the full written waiver document that is imminent. Won't be today, but hopefully in the next few days, and we didn't want to have to wait again until the next board meeting, right, to have that conversation. So this will be a high-level overview to be followed by the formal written request that I'll talk about a little bit today. So as I go through, going to hit 4 key topics, just one slide to ground ourselves in what is ESSA, what are we even waiving, then get into what Indiana, what a waiver consists of in the federal law, what Indiana hopes to achieve through our waiver, and then give a quick overview of timeline and next steps. So, kicking it off with what is ESEA or ESSA? So the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, most recently reauthorized by the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015, is kind of the general federal law that governs education across the United States of America. Many folks, we just heard about our assessment results. ESEA requires every state to administer an assessment in reading, math, and science. Also requires publicly reported data universally across the country. Again, not all those data are always comparable because different states will have different policies, but all states are required to report a certain set of data. The goal of the law is to ensure that every student receives a high-quality education, no matter their background, the state that they live in, or the background, or their family history. And then some key principles that were included in ESSA was a focus on increasing transparency beyond just our schools, but to the larger community, and empowering parents by increasing flexibility of certain funding streams. I'm not going to get super technical, to promote more options for families who might be attending an underperforming school. And then lastly, and I kind of hit on this again, continued devolution of responsibilities down to the states to empower states to have more local control. But it is still a federal law. And so while the law aimed to maximize flexibility for states, Congress still did include provisions that allow states to request a waiver. And so we intend to leverage that flexibility and request a waiver from certain provisions of the existing federal law. And I think it's important that we start from why. And it's very clear in the legislation that ESEA flexibility waivers are meant to advance student academic achievement, meaning it is not about just eliminating requirements or lowering administrative burdens. Those can be justifiable evidence of why you need a waiver, but the ultimate goal, you must demonstrate that you have a plan to leverage the flexibility to advance student achievement, and that is for all students across the state.
I think that's a key point. It is for all kids, which we will continue to keep our eye on.
That is exactly right. Thank you, Dr. Jenner. So as we think about ESEA flexibility, a quick overview of the requirements in law. This is laid out explicitly in ESEA as written currently. Every waiver must clearly articulate the specific sections that need to be waived. They must describe how the state will leverage the flexibility to advance student achievement. The state must also provide a plan to monitor and evaluate the impact, right, of the flexibility, so demonstrate some outcomes, some measurables. And finally, how the state will continue to provide, hitting the same point before, support to all students and all populations that are prioritized in the law. And so as we began this process, we engaged informally a handful of what we call federal program directors across the state of Indiana. And in those preliminary informal conversations, we heard a few things. One, it would be immensely helpful and increase our capacity to serve all students if we reduced monitoring and reporting requirements from the state and the federal government. Number two, to expand flexibility regarding staff qualifications that exist in the federal law to empower local officials to make local staffing decisions. ESSA expanded and allowed the state to define a highly qualified educator, but there are additional requirements around paraprofessionals and non-certified staff that continue to impact and limit local decisions, especially when we're facing staffing shortages. And finally, allow grants, the funding that comes through ESEA, to be transferable across programs beyond current eligibility that exists in the law.
Ron, can I hit one? And it's the first one you said. The bureaucratic compliance is more than any non-educator can imagine. The educators that are administering these programs get it, but we get approximately, as a state or even to a local school, about 90% of the money is state money. Well, there's some local money too, but 90% state, 10% federal. And yet, schools will share the time that they're spending with the compliance paperwork where they could be serving children. It is remarkable. And there are some states who've done studies on that, but that's the kind of bureaucratic compliance paperwork that we'd like to remove as much as possible or only have when necessary so that our teachers can focus on the children.
Thanks for that, Katie. And the last thing I would be remiss if I didn't elevate, that prior to formally submitting a waiver to the United States Department of Education, the Indiana Department of Education is required to provide an opportunity for public input. And so we plan to publicly post and solicit general feedback on our written waiver request. That will occur before the plan is formally submitted to the United States Department of Education. I think that's really important so folks know that this preliminary overview is just that. So let's talk about what our goals are. So as we listened, as we processed, as we investigated some of the challenges that Dr. Jenner briefly referenced there, we identified 4 key targets. One is to reduce administrative burden for our Hoosier educators and educational leaders. I'm going to give one concrete example here. And for our folks who are in schools, this is a trigger warning, time and effort logs. If you have an individual who is serving students who have an EL, who are identified as English language learners in part of their day, and then spend another part of their day not serving ELs, but serving students that are eligible for Title I, and then spend another part of their day serving, coaching teachers, there's a world in which that individual every single day has to track how many hours they spend serving ELs, serving teachers, and serving low-income students. And that has to be documented and written on a daily basis because those funding streams come as different programs with different requirements. Oftentimes, a single person does all of that work, but because the programs are articulated separately in law, we're required to document, and this is an important point, prove that the money spent went down to the hour, and even lower than that, to the specific program requirements in the law. Another one is to empower local educational officials with flexibility around funding. ESSER gave us a great framework for this. COVID was just an incredibly challenging time for so many people. But as we move out of COVID and try to take the lessons learned from that experience, what we found is the federal government provided us a block grant of funding. They said it can be used, among other things, on any eligible expense in ESEA. And then we reported back to them how we used it. We did not have to prove to them how we used it. We want to empower our local educators with the same flexibility they had with ESSER moving forward with our funds received through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Through that flexibility, we want to promote innovation. It's funny, I Googled this before this presentation, the concept of braiding funds. If you haven't heard that term, it is a strategic and incredibly laborious approach of finding ways to use funds across multiple programs to support something that you cannot afford out of any one of them individually. So we are going to have national sessions. Illinois has an entire 20-page PDF on how to braid funds so that you can accomplish an ends through the bureaucratic means of ESEA.
And it could be something as simple as what we've talked about today, improve adolescent literacy. And the initiative that a school may have requires multiple braids that still all have different sets of paperwork.
That's right. So we provide all this legal and regulatory support to braid funds, and then on the back end make you prove to us, right, through reporting and compliance, that you've effectively used each penny appropriately. And when you think about that, the more you do, and please don't, you get incredibly frustrated because we end up at the same place, right? Which is flexible use of funds to achieve an ends that is student-centered and is locally driven. And so we want to spur innovation to eliminate those hour-long and 20-page PDFs around how to regulatory braid funds and just say the funds are braided, go. And then lastly, eliminate duplicative systems by adopting Indiana's new A to F or pending A to F accountability system as the federal model. People often ask me whenever I talk about our model is, well, what do the feds think about this? And Indiana has operated since ESSA existed with 2 accountability models. The reality is we've prioritized our state model until COVID, and the federal model has operated behind the scenes. But unfortunately for our educators, the stigma of being on a list, right, regardless if the state publicly is prioritizing it, is an incredible challenge. And it creates a burden for those local educators to get off this quote-unquote federal improvement list, even though the state accountability system might not deem them as underperforming. And this is just about, it's not one is right or wrong. It's about misalignment of values and priorities. And so by combining and adopting Indiana's accountability model as our federal model, eliminating the additional requirements that would prevent us to do so or waiving those requirements, we will make sure that every school has one objective, one expectation, and we are all moving in the same direction. And so we know that schools will heavily appreciate that. So what that ends up looking like is 4 kind of main buckets that will be more clearly articulated in our waiver. That talk about the first 2 first, the SEA block grant and the LEA block grant. Block grant is in quotations because there are restrictions in the law of things that we cannot waive. However, I can braid funds creatively. And what we intend to do is basically take every single dollar that comes into the state, and whether it goes to the Department of Education to administer programming and support schools, or directly down to schools to administer programming and support students, we will basically say, it's calculated the same, but once it gets to you, you can use it for any activity that is approved under ESEA. So no longer will you receive Title III money that can only be used on specific activities. You will receive your Title III money, and then it can be used on any activities. Same with your Title IV, same with your Title II. What that will allow folks is the money no longer has to be braided. It all has the same universal allowable uses, just like ESSER. And then on the back end, we will build streamlined, efficient reporting requirements so that we can collect data on how much they're using to support ELs, how much they're using to support teachers, but not force them to prove down to the penny how they are using those funds. We want to do that at the SEA level and at the LEA level. Some creative legal gymnastics taking place there, I assure you. And then the innovation grant. The state receives a few different competitive grant awards from the feds. We want to streamline and eliminate some of the requirements associated with those that limit or inhibit our ability to spur innovation. So concretely, in this instance, Indiana has a robust ecosystem of public education. The federal government has not caught up with us. They continue to force us to funnel things through the traditional geographically located school corporations, if you will, for the most part, because that's how a lot of states operate. When we know we have a very dynamic educational environment that serves students across school types, we need to make sure that we're eliminating some of these barriers and requirements associated with these grants so that we can get them out to the schools that are serving the students that have the greatest need. And lastly, I talked about this a ton, so I'm not going to hit it again, the accountability, flexibility, adopting Indiana's A to F model as our federal model.
The one I would flag just really quickly, and I think we cut the specific number out because it varies school to school.
Yeah, exactly.
But schools may have 12 to 16 federal funding streams, and one funding stream might be $3,400, and another funding stream might be $7,000, and another, right? So, but imagine, I mean, that level of compliance paperwork. And I mean, we even have schools from time to time say, do I have to take this because of the amount of paperwork just to launch that small amount of money, especially for some of our smaller rural schools. So that's the level of needing to simplify that we're going to be asking the federal government for, with continuing to keep focus on all kids.
That is exactly right. And I think it's important to point that we have a precedent for this approach. It is the funding that we received under the Elementary and Secondary Education Emergency Relief Fund, ESSER, during COVID. They gave us a large grant, and they said, tell us how you intend to strategically use this to support all students. So there's a precedent here, and if you want to look at how Indiana would likely go about this work, look over the past several years in our strategic approach to the use of those flexible funds. So what this means for Hoosier educators, and then I'll get to a timeline, and at least I'll get out of here. So first, more time spent serving students by reducing compliance exercises. The amount of folks that I talk to who are retroactively completing monitoring evidence document collection for a monitoring visit because they were overwhelmed in real time trying to actually serve students is incredibly disappointing, and we want to eliminate that. Number two, better align interventions. As we support consolidating the funding, we no longer have to think through the burden of braiding funds or being innovative. We can just say, what are your needs, and do you have enough money to support them? And that's going to help drive the most innovative, the most aligned interventions, because we won't have any considerations of bureaucratic barriers. And then lastly, through this work, a greater impact on Indiana's priorities. As we elevate Indiana's expectations for graduation, Indiana's expectations for third grade literacy, and more as the primary goals for all parties involved, both Hoosiers as well as representatives in Washington, D.C. So timeline. We're here today, July 16th, providing a high-level overview. In the coming weeks, we will release the full waiver for public comment. That public comment will be open for 30 days prior to a formal submission. We hope to have that submission in by no later than September, if not sooner. And we'll work with the United States Department of Education through the technicalities and legalese, because there are restrictions in federal law of what we can and cannot waive, throughout the fall and the winter, and hopefully by no later than July next year, be going into the school year with a clear understanding of the additional flexibility and prioritization that we've secured for our schools on behalf of our students. And so the last point I will make is the United States Department of Education has repeatedly expressed to me in conversations their commitment to working with us to try to get us there. So while we I put on the screen that we'll be going back and negotiating with the Department of Education, I want to emphasize that is my expectation based on their words that will be in complete good faith with a shared goal of getting over or getting around the legal restrictions so that we can secure this flexibility, not to kind of nitpick and pigeonhole us. They've been very, very supportive there.
So Ron, a couple things and I'll open it up. Huge props to you. You've spent a lot of time meeting with university. You can tell it's 2:30 and not in the morning, meeting with US DOE officials to make sure they're aware, here's what we're thinking, they can push and pull so that when we put it out there for public comment, hopefully next week, we will have a decent product to start with, and then the public can weigh in and we'll finesse before we officially submit it. So just enormous props to you and your team for all of your work. Board, any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I'd like to
Greg.
invite Ron to my political science class so he can teach my bureaucracy chapter, chapter 15.
You should.
You better get a parent consent form.
13.
That's accurate. You heard it here.
But it's common sense.
it's-
Why are we using common sense? It's just cutting the red tape. It's what we talk about. It's just a beautiful job of showing how to be efficient with our tax dollars. So thank you.
Yeah.
And if Ron does teach on that day, I would love to be in attendance.
Let's go. Make that happen. Hey,
yeah,
if Pat could be there.
Oh, no. Oh, my.
We'll need a
Yeah.
consent form.
Don't get a quorum.
I go as directed.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that comment, Greg. Anyone else, and those of you online, we have the timeline up, so I'm not able to see you if anybody, oh, now I can, if anybody has any thoughts.
I think it's
Go
a
ahead, BJ.
testament to the trust that the US DOE has in the work that Indiana's done with you guys and your team. So I mean, that's a compliment to you. You don't always get to hear those things. So I mean, it's, as we've kind of joked about, the federal government doesn't like to give up control. And the fact that they've said, you guys do a really good job, bring us what you need, is probably not everyone receives that. So that's something you should take some pride in. Good job.
Yeah, thank you, and that's props to educators around the state. Parents and families having faith in our system, you as board members, many others. So, okay, so we have several press releases that are coming out. Again, one, we'll get more information out about Indiana winning the Innovation Award. We will get the press release out as soon as that accountability rule drops so the general public knows, weigh in. And we will get a press release out as soon as this flexibility waiver drops so we can get that public feedback. So we will do the best we can to communicate with the general public on some of the work that we have ahead. Huge thank you to the board members for, again, adjusting the time. I know several of us have 2:30s, me included, so I'm gonna have to sprint out of here. But any final thoughts before we ask for a motion to adjourn? Would some,
Motion to adjourn.
motion? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.